Hi, and welcome to the Restorative Wellness Clinician's Corner, video series exclusively for functional health professionals, where we interview the top experts in the latest research, products, tools, and best practices for getting your clients exceptional results. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to today's episode of the RWS Clinician's Corner. We're doing something a little different today. We have gone into the archives and pulled out clinical pearls from some of our favorite episodes. And we're starting today with one of our most popular interviews, Dr. Dominic D'Agostino. Oh man, this was such a fantastic conversation. We unpacked the ketogenic diet in all its nuances. This interview first aired in its full form back in 2023. The full interview can be found on YouTube or here on podcast as episode 1. For today, we've pulled out some of our favorite components of the conversation for you, so please consider this a teaser and enjoy. His primary research focuses on developing and testing nutritional and metabolic-based therapies for a variety of disease states and advancing the use of metabolic-based therapies into human clinical applications. Like, what is it that got you so fascinated with the ketogenic diet to begin with?
There wasn't like a whole lot of opportunity at the time in the 1990s for nutrition and I kind of wanted to go to med school. So I started majoring in biology too. And at the time, I remember 1994, I was undergrad. I saw on Dateline NBC, the Hollywood producer, Jim Abrams, and he talked about how the ketogenic diet kind of saved his son that had drug-resistant epilepsy. And Jim later went on, he's a close friend of ours, and we work with him when we host the Metabolic Health Summit. We hold a gala dinner, and it goes to the Charlie Foundation. Charlie's story is very interesting. He was on many anti-seizure drugs and was kind of headed towards, he really had almost like terminal epilepsy. Nothing was controlling it. And Jim went to the library and discovered the ketogenic diet was used, 100 years ago, in the 1920s, and was able to get a team at Johns Hopkins to implement it in his son. And I found this to be fascinating, but it was not really. I was more interested in nutrition for different reasons, for sports and body composition reasons when I was an undergrad. And then kind of evolved to the point after my neuroscience training at Rutgers, I went on to study seizures, and I revisited nutrition. And I remember the ketogenic diet was used for epilepsy, and we were studying military operational diving, and a limitation of that is oxygen toxicity seizures. So I was able to incorporate ketogenic diet therapies and ways to induce therapeutic ketosis with different forms of ketones as a neuroprotective anti-seizure strategy. That was 2008. And it took me about 2 years to get like high-level federal funding for the projects. But for the last 15 years, I've been studying the ketogenic diet for seizures, but probably at least a half dozen or more different therapeutic applications. The ketogenic diet is unique in that it's the only diet that is characterized by an objective biomarker, and that would be blood ketone levels, urine ketone, or breath ketones, right? So as ketone levels are elevated within a certain range, then that becomes clinically ketosis. I could go down the list too of the different applications that are currently being studied. It could polycystic ovary syndrome, type 2 diabetes, weight loss. There was 25 clinical trials for weight loss, cancer and muscle wasting, 47 clinical trials on that, 4 on Parkinson's disease, over a dozen for Alzheimer's disease, of course, epilepsy and different seizure disorders, migraines, Kabuki syndrome, which we study, Angelman syndrome. And then there's like a wide range of inborn errors of metabolism, like we study that too, glycogen synthase disorder, type 2, Pompe disease, McArdle disease, Rett syndrome, PDH deficiency, GLUT1 deficiency syndrome, Dravet syndrome, Lennox-Gastaut syndrome, like all these things. Actually, some of the ones that I mentioned, the only therapy that exists for the disorder is the ketogenic diet for like PDH deficiency or GLUT1 and Lennox-Gastaut syndrome. It's often used. So these are all like evidence-based clinical applications. But then there's the like emerging applications. So that would be psychiatric disorders. One of them would be probably the psychiatric disorder that kills more people than anything else is actually anorexia. And my colleague, Deanna Rancourt, studies that at USF and is doing a study on that. Bipolar disorder, anxiety, autism, traumatic brain injury, type 1 diabetes is actually, there's a clinical trial with a ketogenic diet for that. Non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, stroke, HIV, dementia, alcohol withdrawal syndrome. There was 2 clinical trials on that. And chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, study on that. So none of these, like most of what I just mentioned here, was not being studied at all 5 or 10 years ago.
I had a question here in terms of the different, when are we thinking about this clinically? Now I'm going to change my question given that list you just gave us. When are we not thinking about this clinically, right? Like so here we've got a lot of clinicians working with people using diet as a very key element in their strategy. Are there times when this is really contraindicated?
Liver disease. So your liver is the site and production of ketones. And if you have liver failure, it's hard for your liver to be healthy enough to have that elevation of fat oxidation to make the ketones, because you really need to ramp up fat oxidation. So pancreatitis would be one, fatty acid oxidation disorders, primary carnitine deficiency, carnitine palmityl transferase deficiency, CPT1A, I believe. So carnitine actually plays an important role in moving fatty acids to the mitochondria. And I see this quite often in the blood work of kids. When you do blood work and look at and measure carnitine, it's often deficient because you're burning so much fat that and carnitine plays a role in transporting the fat into the mitochondria. So you're oxidizing and burning such huge amounts of fat that you're depleting your body of carnitine. So carnitine is often, clinically, it's actually a supplement. So carnitine and potassium citrate to prevent the kidney stones. And so that's, if you've had kidney stones in the past, they'll tell you not to do the ketogenic diet. And there's definitely a high risk of kidney stones in the literature, but I think that has to do more like with the type of ketogenic diet they're using and also hydration. I think if you just correct for hydration and also take like an electrolyte supplement to just offset the mild metabolic acidosis, then in those studies where they even use potassium citrate, there's like no increase in kidney stones.
It's about suppressing insulin, and just that alone, the benefits of that can be absolutely tremendous. But of course, other mechanisms, I've heard you speak a little bit about it in terms of some of the anti-inflammatory pathways that it can activate, mitigating oxidative stress, increasing GABA. Can you talk a little bit about some of those other sort of side benefits that we're getting that might not be what people are thinking of first when they think of this diet?
Yeah. So we study the signaling roles of ketogenic. So ketones are they're energy molecules that can provide a boost to your brain energy, but they also have pretty significant effects at impacting signaling pathways that are pathophysiologically linked to many different disorders. So when I first started studying the ketones, we actually measured oxidative stress, reactive oxygen species, and I developed an assay to measure superoxide in the brain and show that under like high levels of oxygen, these were elevated, and then the ketones were more effective than any drug that we looked at lowering oxidative stress, like in the hippocampus, for example. We looked at the CA1 region. So a reduction in reactive oxygen species, a decrease in glutamate to GABA ratio. So one thing that happens is, from a signaling perspective, is that the ketones, in ways we don't fully understand, activate an enzyme called glutamic acid decarboxylase. And that's the enzyme that converts all the GABA that we have in our body is made from glutamate, and that's converted by glutamic acid decarboxylase, and they're GAD65 and 67. That's what we measure in the lab. We do Western blots for that. And then that's sort of these two different enzymes will dictate how much glutamate goes to GABA. And there's about a 30% elevation. What we focus on now is actually the epigenetic effects. So my PhD student, Sarah Moss, her PhD PhD project is essentially the metabolic control of epigenetics, and specifically beta hydroxybutyrate. So it affects histone deacetylase enzymes as HDAC inhibitors, but what we're studying is something called beta hydroxybutyrylation, where beta hydroxybutyrate directly interacts with the histone and modifies the histone in a way to kick on gene expression. Wow. So this idea came from Dr. Bjornson at Johns Hopkins, and he studied the kabuki mouse model. And he showed that he could rescue the mouse model with the ketogenic diet. And his speculation was, and he did some superficial testing, was that it was working by affecting gene expression. So our experiments are not to use the diet, but to use different exogenous ketone formulations, because kids with Kabuki syndrome are very picky about what they eat. Mm-hmm. So we're designing sort of formulations where therapeutically you can ingest ketones, elevate beta hydroxybutyrate, and then beta hydroxybutyrate is a form of epigenetic therapy. So that's the project we're working on now. So all these different mechanisms are sort of, and it's probably not just one, but it's like many mechanisms in synergy.
So supplementation, we talked about a little bit with exogenous ketones, but talking about somebody who's on the diet, are there certain supplements? You mentioned electrolytes, you mentioned carnitine. Is there anything else that people should be mindful of in terms of any potential deficiencies or other types of support we want to bring in to facilitate the process?
There's a couple of things that I think can help, and these were kind of given to me by the dietitians over time. So carnitine, magnesium is going to be really important. Vitamin D3, of course, you want to make sure that there's a paper, one or two papers showing that selenium was lower, but I think that had to do with the type of ketogenic diet that they were on. If you're getting fish and other more of a balanced array of different protein sources, probably won't be an issue. And then MCT oil, which you can buy pretty much anywhere, is going to be really, pretty much all clinicians now or dietitians really start to incorporate MCT because it really boosts the ketones. And for exogenous ketones, I'm of the opinion to steer away from the ketone esters. We've done enough research that I feel that they should almost be in a category of like a drug, because we've never, I'll put it this way, we've unintentionally euthanize animals, I guess you could say, with a high dose ketone ester. It can induce ketoacidosis. So that's a potential that people need to realize. You need a large dose, but we've never had that problem with with ketone salts. And we've done studies where we have administered these things for a long duration of time. The blood work looks great. Everything looks great. So ketone salt products would be Keto Start. It's a real good one. As far as MCT oil, the powder is pretty useful too. I think Quest Nutrition makes a MCT powder that's pretty useful and can be mixed with the ketone salts.
Awesome.
Other than that, you don't really need a lot of supplements on a ketogenic diet if you choose a good balance of food. A good. I think it really is important to work with a dietitian on it. Some people will say an antioxidant supplement or just just a multivitamin supplement. So methylated B vitamins for some people need that. So I think, I'm kind of a minimalist when it comes to supplementation, but some of the supplements that I think are, have a really good track record are like creatine monohydrate. It has more research than any other supplement on the planet. It has a lot of, benefits to the brain and strength and body composition. But caffeine too, and I guess maybe some people will like to hear this, caffeine can greatly boost ketone production. And when you consume caffeine with MCT, it converts more of the MCT into ketones, actually increases ketosis by 40%. And
Wow.
Stephen Cunnane, I mean, I observed this, but it was nice that, a group did a study up in Canada. I think it was Stephen Cunnane's lab that showed that if you dose the MCT with caffeine, then that stimulates greater ketogenesis. There's also the amino acid taurine can help the liver produce ketones. So, and that should be taken not a small dose, like 2 to 5 grams per day, upwards of even 8 grams per day. A taurine really doesn't have any, you could buy it bulk, like online, so it's pretty cheap. And it has a lot of other benefits too. And that could be, if you're not producing ketones, the taurine has an effect on the liver. I think maybe even a therapeutic effect. And I've noticed that in people that just are not healthy, maybe they have like the precursor to alcoholic liver, like you get them on taurine or maybe N-acetylcysteine in the beginning, but taurine can really help boost their liver production of ketones.
And if you are to pair the ketogenic diet and exogenous supplementation, are we getting one of those situations where it's like 1 + 1 = 5? Are you getting like really compounded benefits, or is it just a little bit of a benefit?
Yeah, all great questions. And I was actually forced to study exogenous ketones because the Department of Defense did not want to study the ketogenic diet. So they said that's not innovative. It's not something that our warfighters would follow. So they said, go design a ketogenic diet and a drug. So that set me on a cascade to develop various forms of exogenous ketones. And it's our experience that in the context of seizures, at least tonic-clonic seizures that we study, the first compound we tested was 1,3-butanediol. And when you're seeing all the feeds come up for exogenous ketones, that's typically what it is. Like, I don't know, I could mention the names of the different. So if you look on the label, it's something called 1,3-butanediol, which is technically not a ketone ester, but it's being marketed as a ketone ester. It's a dirt cheap dialcohol, glycol, if you want to be specific. And what your body does, it can convert that to beta hydroxybutyrate. But the liver has to work really hard to do that. And you use alcohol dehydrogenase, and then you kick off an aldehyde molecule that's toxic and can actually give you like a hangover the next day.
Oh, wow.
So Dr. Richard Veach actually had the idea of taking 1,3-butanediol and then adding ketones to that. So that would be like, there's a product called KE4, I think Ketone Aid. I don't know if we can mention products on here.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love you to. Yeah. Especially your favorite ones.
Okay.
Yeah.
So HVMN is 1,3-butanediol. And that's like the dirt cheap stuff we buy in like 55-gallon drums. It is ketogenic and it's hypoglycemic agent, but the original, one of the original ketone esters was 1,3-butanediol beta hydroxybutyrate monoester. And that's being sold by Delta G and also being sold by Ketone Aid and KE4. That's a very powerful ketogenic compound that will elevate ketones like in the 4 to 5 millimolar range.
Oh, wow.
That is the first ketone ester that we studied in our lab for seizures, and it had no effect. Actually, like the animals were trending to get seizures a little bit sooner.
Oh.
So I went on a cascade. I would talk to different scientists, and they said, well, it's shifting the redox ratio. You need to elevate acetoacetate at the same level beta hydroxybutyrate to keep that redox balance. So I got a synthesis protocol from Henri Brunengraber, who ran the NIH Metabolomics lab at Case Western, and we synthesized 1,3-butanediol acetoacetate diester, which is 1,3-butanediol that makes beta hydroxybutyrate, and then it has acetoacetates that get released into the blood. That had tremendous anti-seizure effects and anti-cancer effects, but it tastes absolutely horrible. So we're studying it now at Duke University for like military operations, like oxygen toxicity. So we've done all the rat studies, and then it got FDA approved, and now we're doing the human clinical trials at Duke University. So that's the ketone esters. Now, the ketone salts are actually kind of what I use. So the Keto Start product is an electrolyte beta hydroxybutyrate. There's an electrolyte product called Element.
Yeah.
It's LMNT, and it's got like sodium, potassium, magnesium, calcium. So Keto Start is Element, but the elements are bound to beta hydroxybutyrate. So it's sodium beta hydroxybutyrate, calcium, potassium. So you're consuming and getting the electrolytes and then delivering beta hydroxybutyrate at the same time. The issue is that many ketone salts on the market are just not tolerable. They taste okay, but they go right through me.
Oh, really?
So, yeah, and that's for various reasons. You really need to have an electrolyte balance, and I think the Keto Start product has the electrolyte ratios that just happen to be similar to Element. They probably did their homework and probably figured out that this is the maximum tolerable salt that you can consume, and that seems to be ideal for the electrolytes also prevent the acidosis, which could potentially cause the kidney stones. So, and when you consume a ketone electrolyte, it has no stress to the liver at all. So you're delivering ketones, you're delivering electrolytes, and I'm in favor of like using a ketone salt and then combining it if you can tolerate medium chain triglycerides. Because what the MCTs will do, and that could be delivered in an oil or a powder, when you mix up and consume the ketone electrolytes with an MCT formulation, the MCT stimulates your own ketogenesis, and it also delays gastric absorption. So the pharmacokinetic profile of the beta hydroxybutyrate is shifted to the right. So instead of a peak in an hour or so, and then it comes down to zero, in 2 hours, you can get like 4 to 6 hours of like pretty mild to strong ketosis.
Well, and if you're able to combine a modified ketogenic diet and using some of these exogenous ketones too, I can imagine as well using these exogenous ketones would allow one to transition more smoothly into that, plus sort of slowly making those dietary changes rather than, that super abrupt withdrawal and then popping into the keto flu and all of that kind of thing. So
yeah, for sure.
So when are you going to be checking in? So if somebody's new to the ketogenic diet, you do the lab work beforehand, they're on it. 2 months, 3 months, weeks? What's the timeline?
Yeah, when you first start, probably, quarterly. You want to do every 3 months or 4 months. And 3 or 4 months would be good. And then I always do it at least twice a year. I do a comprehensive, blood work twice a year or so.
That makes a lot of sense.
I do hormones too. Like, it'd probably be good to measure from the latest data that I've seen, like thyroid, your TSH, T4, reverse T3, T3, estradiol, testosterone, DHEA, pregnenolone. Like I measure all these things. I also use Genova Diagnostics testing. The Metabolomics Plus is really good. And it gives you insight into, it's got the omega quant kind of analysis of the omega-3s and omega-6 fatty acids. I like that. It does like toxic elements. It measures that, like lead, mercury, arsenic, and things like that. So, if you're doing more advanced testing and your patients want to have more advanced testing, I think that's it was kind of an actionable test for me, the Metabolomics Plus. It's not cheap, but I like that.
The Clinician's Corner podcast is sponsored by Restorative Wellness Solutions, the premier clinical training program for health practitioners who want to learn how to finally get to the root source of their clients' health concerns and help them reverse complex health challenges and chronic illness. You can't afford to keep guessing. Your clients can't afford it either. Today's clients are sicker than ever before. Their health histories are more complex than ever before. And you simply can't deliver the results they crave or build the practice you desire without the right clinical skills. Enter Restorative Wellness Solutions' foundational course, Mastering the Art and Science of Gastrointestinal Healing. Our clinically proven, systematic approach to restoring balance within the body that has helped over 1,000 practitioners transform their clients' lives, grow their business, and change the way health is delivered. In less than 12 weeks, you'll develop the clinical skills and confidence you need to help your clients feel better faster. Learn how to work with advanced lab testing to identify food sensitivities and imbalances within the gut. Craft custom targeted protocols that truly resolve your client's gut issues, and work safely and effectively with supplements to deliver consistently life-changing results. Visit masterguthealing.com to apply today. And so if someone is to go into the full ketogenic diet, is there a risk to them staying in there long-term?
Long-term. Well, if we look at the epilepsy literature, and that's the only literature we could point to. And I am in contact and correspondence with teams that have monitored people who have been continuously, not one day off, on a ketogenic diet for more than 3 decades. So they've been on a calculated, like taking out the scale and weighing everything for over 3 decades. And some of these patients have glucose transporter type 1 deficiency, and their blood work looks great. Their cardiovascular scans look great. But then again, they have been highly monitored, right, by a medical team. So when you have that, so if you're going to wing it and do it yourself, I think I would let the blood work guide you and the biomarkers guide you. So, I didn't talk about blood pressure too, but blood pressure usually sharply goes down. In our subjects, it went down pretty sharply. That there's a little bit of a natriuretic and a diuretic effect to a ketogenic diet. So it's pretty common to see someone with a blood pressure of like 140/80 drop to like 115/60, in the first week or two. Just because, if they're eating a lot of carbs or insulin's elevated, insulin facilitates sodium retention. And then you go on a ketogenic diet, your insulin drops through the floor. It goes from like, 30 down to like 5. And then you dump a lot of sodium and a lot of water with that. So you go from hypovolemic to almost or hypervolemic to hypovolemic, to where you almost have orthostatic hypotension after like 2 weeks. So I've seen that. That's actually pretty characteristic, more so in women, not so much in men, but in women. So and that's maybe it's a side effect, but it's maybe a favorable side effect. And what's often a problem is that some of these people are on blood pressure medication. And if you keep the same level of blood pressure medication on the ketogenic diet, you got to taper it down. So that becomes another, you got to work. People need to really work closely with their primary care doctor when they go on these diets. And it's actually a pretty serious thing, because they could fall, especially if the older people. So, I've talked to a lot of doctors who kind of ran into that scenario where people are just so regimented about their medication. They go on these diets and they lose a lot of weight, and the blood pressure goes down and all these things improve, but they still continue to take the medication, and then the medication becomes more sensitive. When you're on very low carbohydrate diets, there's less need for insulin facilitated glucose uptake. So, I'll see if you do a glucose tolerance test, you'll see this, right? But typically what happens is if you titrate carbohydrates back in, that quickly gets restored. So there's physiological insulin resistance, and then there's, pathological. All things would indicate, in the context of a very low carbohydrate diet to the point where it's ketogenic, that the reduction in insulin sensitivity, meaning that if you consume a bolus of carbohydrates, you'll have a higher spike up in insulin that you would otherwise have. But that is not pathological in my view. Well, Keto Nutrition is our information website, and we've had that for, I don't know, about 6-7 years now. And there's a blog on that. We host a conference, the Metabolic Health Summit, where we have clinicians talk. We have it's a balance between, basic science, clinical science, and then we have, high-level speakers like Rhonda Patrick was one of our keynotes. And then we have a lot of neuroscientists from Yale, Harvard, Duke, Johns Hopkins. We have some of the best speakers in the world at that conference.
Thank you so much. Such invaluable information, and just thank you for all the work that you're doing and the research on this. It's so important, and so there's just so much potential. I'm very, very excited about it. So thank you.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.